What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Let's talk about MESHUGGAH's Immutable. So just to be clear, this is not my review. I will be updating my tier list for the full video closer to release, but I got my early access last night, and I just thought I'd kind of freeform share some of my early impressions from the first two listens. So, as regular viewers know, I'm a long-time fan since the early 2000s. I'm not going to recap that whole story, but basically, like, maybe a year or so before Nothing came out is when I discovered Destroy, Erase, Improve, and just totally had my mind balls blown apart. And this album definitely appeals to that. Like, it's definitely a shift from the last one, which was a shift in of itself. Like, I enjoy the Violent Sleep of Reason quite a bit, and I'm actually pretty in awe of it because they recorded a lot of that stuff pretty live. Like, they didn't just copy and paste the parts together like on most of their other albums. And given the complexity of playing the polyrhythms in this music, I love that. Like, that's pretty cool. But I do kind of prefer their more produced sound, and this definitely goes back to that. And in fact, I think this album reminds me a lot of like the Nothing and Obscene era, which I feel like a lot of people would say is kind of like their golden era. Those albums are highly beloved by myself included. A little bit of some other stuff in there too, but we'll get to that. But I'd say a lot of these songs really have especially that Nothing aesthetic, where it's like they all have kind of a more like stripped back sort of simplicity to them. And a lot of the songs sound similar in terms of like tone and atmosphere, which helps the album feel kind of like it's one concrete flowing thing. But then each riff kind of has like slight variations, and then they do little tricks here and there to give them each their own personality. Like, I think it takes a few listens, especially for people who maybe haven't been listening to Meshuggah as long, to really pick up on those variations. But I'm already, even in my second listen, kind of getting into those. And then there's little flavor touches here and there too. They bring in a lot of those also like eerie backing guitar, like the sustains, where it's almost like I always describe the like backing guitars in Meshuggah almost more like funeral doom, where it's barely even like a riff. It's more of just this like soaring ambience that's very eerie and creepy. A lot of that on this album, which I feel like, again, is definitely a benchmark from this era. And then bringing back in quite a few solos, too. Like those really chaotic, kind of like mathy, jazz-infused solos that I'm so used to from their early era. And I feel like we don't get as much of those on some of their later albums. So they are back in full force here, which I think is really fun. The first time I got that, which I think is on maybe actually, I think it might be on the first track right away. We get one of those, and I was already like, ooh, yeah. And speaking of which, like, just getting into that first track was just like a wave of nostalgia. Like, immediately, the, again, like, simplicity, stripped back nature of it, and the production and the way it was all coming together definitely took me back to being like 16, 17 and hearing them for the first time, which I thought was really cool. I need to give this time to settle and kind of like let some of that wear off so that I can really have more of an unbiased opinion on this thing, but I'm already enjoying it to that degree. I mentioned Chaos Sphere too. There's, I think, like 2 tracks in particular that they're not quite Chaos Sphere. Like, they don't have the rawness and abrasiveness of that album, but the speed and the kind of like thrashy flair to the guitars definitely reminded me more of that. Kind of like a cross connection between Chaos Sphere and Nothing in a way. So it was nice to hear that too. Again, variety. Like, there's a decent amount of variety that once you like get in the groove and give it a little bit of time, you start to notice these things. Also some Kolos in there as well to an extent, but I'd say more so sounding again like those early albums. There's quite a few tracks too that feel like a blend of tracks from Nothing and Obscene. There were certain riffs that even reminded me directly of some of the riffs from Obscene, just a little bit more slowed down with the vibe of Nothing. And again, love both of those albums. Those are like peak Meshuggah for me. So just exciting to hear that stuff. Side note too, somebody in my comments, I can't even remember when and which particular Meshuggah related video, said that Kolos is slower. And that person needs to listen to Kolos again, because that is just factually incorrect. Like, I'm always open to people's opinions and, like, subjective thoughts on how they feel about something, but Kolos is anything but slow. Like, most of those tracks are very fast. Like, the title track, the I Am Colossus, has some very kind of more plotting, slower sections in it, but really, the vast majority, I'd say, like, 85% of that album is, like, balls to the wall. So that's kind of an aside. But anyways, there's some experimentation on here too. Nothing that we haven't like necessarily heard in some way before, but nice to hear it like coming back in, because I feel like there's been less of it on some of their other stuff. Like Jens actually slightly plays with his vocals in certain places. It's mostly the usual very like concussive percussion focused howl that we're used to. But then there's also moments where he uses the kind of whispery, creepy vocals that I feel like are more, again, something from that Nothing era. And there's one song too that has like almost like spoken word, but it's like pitched down and sounds very eerie. Reminds me a bit of like Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs. And then instrumentally too, there's a couple little things here and there that, again, we've heard before, but it's nice to hear them coming back. But in particular, I think the one that kind of caught me off guard the most is Black Cathedral, which is just like a 2-minute instrumental sort of interlude, but there's no djent in it whatsoever. And usually for Meshuggah, it's either you get the djent or you get those really like eerie, minimalist, kind of quiet passages, which there is some of that in here too. Not much, but particularly the closing track. And there's some other areas as well. But Black Cathedral is more of like a black metal interlude, as I would describe it. Like, it has this very just blackened sounding tremolo, very ominous, very evil sounding. There's no percussive element to it. I think it's like just the guitars. And so that was kind of interesting that they threw that in there as sort of a curveball. I'm still kind of deciding how I feel about it within the runtime. And also some pretty lengthy instrumental sections too, which I guess you could argue is kind of more like Hatch 33, which some of y'all know. Not a big fan of that album, but some people really like it. I'd say that these instrumental sections blow those out of the water, though. Like, pretty solid stuff and very engaging, which brings me to another point. This is a long album. In case you didn't know, this is, I believe, their longest album at like 68 minutes, which is pretty substantial. I think even their longest before this is like just under an hour. I could be incorrect about that. But yeah, we're talking over an hour, nearly an hour and 10 minutes on this thing, which definitely made me nervous going in, because y'all know I'm not a big fan of super long albums unless they can justify it, right? Like, I'm not against long albums just generally. I'm against albums that are longer than they need to be, right? And so I was a little concerned with just kind of how Meshuggah does things, if that would get repetitive, and it hasn't yet. Like, I've been pleasantly surprised. I definitely think it could be trimmed down here and there. I think there are some sections that don't need to be as long. I think it could be more focused. I think it does lose maybe some of the punch of my favorite albums from Meshuggah as a result of how long it is. But ultimately, like, there's not a bad song on here. Like, I enjoy all of them. And again, because of those slight variations and subtle experimentation and pretty good pacing too of this album overall, I would say, like, they know when to throw in that kind of quieter, slower parts, or give you a more like rhythmically kind of just groove focused head bobber versus more of like a head banger thrasher kind of track. And so they've done a good job of making this a 68 minutes that I can enjoy all the way through, even if it probably didn't need to be that long. But it's good. Overall, I want to say I'm digging it. I'm digging it quite a bit. Looking forward to listening to this thing a lot more, because I just really enjoy Meshuggah. Like, they're a great band. Seeing them live about a year or two ago, I guess it's more than that now. It seems like it wasn't that long ago. But I saw them play at, I think, the Crystal Ballroom here, and they shook the floor. And especially hearing them play some classics like Future Breed Machine, which was the very first song I heard from them, was almost like a religious experience. So always excited for new Meshuggah. I think they've done an excellent job with this album. I think they did what they set out to do, because the quotation from the band was that they wanted to do something kind of with no restraints if they were going to do it, and just do something that they thought was cool and just what they wanted to do. And I feel that coming through in the DNA. And then again, it also appeals to that nostalgia factor, which it doesn't feel like it's forced either. Like sometimes bands try to recapture and even like, you know, retitle their albums as like the sequel to a classic album. And I don't really get that here. It just feels like a celebration of everything they love about their music from the past, present, and moving into the future. So looking forward to y'all getting to hear the rest of it. And yeah, watch out for the updated tier list. I already have an older one that I've been looking forward to, kind of upping the energy on that one for a while. Let me know in the comments maybe like your favorite Meshuggah album or song. And then check out this playlist for plenty more of my opinions on 2022 new songs and albums. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.